Welcome to Make It Pretty Please, the Design and Strategy podcast. Automotive projects don't start in a void. They start with a decision that locks in capital, resources, and brand direction for years. And yet, the most fundamental questions are often left unanswered. What do we want to achieve, and why? Just make it pretty, please. Any creative's nightmare briefing isn't direction, but a promise of problems ahead in the development process. This is what we talk about. Meaning and form, delivered through brand strategy and design direction in an automotive context. Each episode is structured like a strategic project meeting. One question, clear thinking, real exchange, and no decoration. Now, let's get into today's topic.
So there is this moment, you start with a blank sheet of paper, a new electric vehicle, a new architecture, new possibilities, and the chance to rethink things from the ground up. The first sketches explore that freedom. The proportions begin to shift. The cabin moves. The stance feels different from what you're used to. It's unfamiliar, but there's a sense that this could lead somewhere new. And then the first reviews begin. The feedback is subtle at first. A suggestion to bring it a bit closer to the current model range. A question maybe around recognizability. A comment about whether it still feels like the brand. And with each iteration, the design adjusts. Certain lines become more refined and defined. Surfaces start to echo what already exists. And the overall stance slowly settles into something more familiar. The project moves forward, the car becomes more refined, more resolved, and easier to recognize as part of the portfolio. And yet, when you step back at the end of the process, there's a quiet realization. Despite everything that has changed underneath, the product feels remarkably close to the car it was meant to replace. And at that point, a different kind of question starts to emerge. What if our why isn't convincing anymore? Now, Wolfgang, in this situation, how do you see this from a strategic point of view?
For me, this is a textbook example how brands lose their compass. Because for decades, the direction was clear. You knew what better meant. It was always more power, more performance, more security, more efficiency, more safety. And suddenly, this direction is no longer there because technology can no longer differentiate brands and it doesn't give the path forward anymore, the path which design can follow. This is what we see with an example as simple as headlights. They started as a pure constraint, right? Everyone had the same round circular headlights. Then technology basically opened up the possibilities and they became an integral part of the design. The shapes became more expressive and finally, with LED, they became a key signature for the brands. This was the traditional path of technology evolves, design follows, and so brands evolve. And today, this clarity is gone. And we basically hit this hyper maturity you mentioned in the first episode, where the path is no longer clear. Design has no longer this crystal clear direction provided by technology. This is when design starts to hold on to what is left. So we have the design cues of the past, and this is where we hold on to when we don't see any other path forward. What do you think? How do you read the situation?
I find that quite a powerful, if slightly pessimistic point of view to say, like, well, you look at what is left. That sounds like a slightly dire situation because you don't know where to go. I think the scene that we just talked about is, in a sense, a photograph of where we are today, specifically in terms of electrification. I remember a few years ago, looking back, let's say about 20 years ago, electrification was the dream of all designers. It was the thing where you really thought, finally, paradigms can shift. You don't need the bonnet, you don't need the transmission tunnel, you can play around with proportions. You need bigger wheels, which designers will always say yes to. A lot of things inspired you. And you could see it in the concept cars and in the student work at that time, where really new shape emerged because there was no bonnet and people really designed empty spaces around that with exciting shapes. You had all these skateboard fantasies. Everything will be in the board. We can have frunks everywhere. You can see through your dashboard. It was an exciting time. Everyone was inspired by it. That was about 20 years ago, the excitement of the new. Then Tesla came along, brought the excitement to the tech and to the usability, but design-wise didn't move the game forward at all. If anything, they took very, very known recipes. I'm probably not exaggerating much by saying they took the best of Mazda design, the best of Buick design, and the best of Jaguar design, and brought it into a genuinely acceptable range with great proportions. And those great proportions are the only thing that Tesla took from the excitement of the new. Long wheelbase, big wheels, short overhangs, and generally an aerodynamic shape. So that was the first step that ended with Tesla. The second step was really electrification as a new thing. Therefore, design-wise, you would differentiate it. That was the period of, in BMW's case, that's going away from the excitement of the i3 to the accents of blue bits and pieces to differentiate the otherwise identical model to the combustion engine model. And now we're in a moment of maturity, as you referred to, because electricity as a powertrain option is nothing new anymore. We've seen it for 30 years now as a possibility. We've seen it for 20 years as something that is useful. And we've seen it now for 10 years as something that makes sense business-wise. Now we're going into a world where you can't define it anymore by a single feature, a single technology. And the temptation is to bring it simply back into the brand portfolio. So I think that scene describes in a way both the good and the bad of the current situation.
From a design strategic perspective, you said to bring it back to the brand portfolio. Visually or aesthetically, yes, that's true. But from an authenticity perspective, this comes at a high price to design something as if it was a petrol car, this skeuomorphic design that longs back to a past technology, and design starts to betray itself with foregoing form follows function. So this is a key principle of design, form follows function. Now you just give it away to recreate the resemblance of a portfolio of the past.
So I see what you mean, but I think you're looking at it very narrowly. From what I hear, I think you're talking about exterior design, and I think you're talking particularly about the front and the front grills.
Yes.
If you think of cars as psychological objects or as political objects, all the battles between interior and exterior, the battles will always be on the exterior because people have more opinions about exteriors. If I have to analyze where are more political and psychological issues, rear or front, of course, it's going to be the front. And everyone has an opinion on the front end of any car. It's quite striking. It is because we're psychological beings, because we associate faces and attitudes and looks and eyes and noses and mouths. And think of it, we give very strange terms to these technical bits, the shoulder line, the belt line, the eyes, I guess there's such a strong association of the idea of the combustion machine as a metabolism, something that breathes in, something that burns inside, that it's very hard not to think of this. And electronic things are psychologically harder to understand. They're closer to magic because you don't know what's happening on the inside. It's harder to understand from a mammal perspective what's happening inside an electronic thing. I interpret that you're saying that you're missing something when an electric car just simulates the shape of a radiator, simulates the idea of a combustion engine car. That's a little fake. That's a little strange. But this is an old discussion, I would say. We've had that with fake exhaust tips for many, many years. A lot of the grills became fake a long time ago. Think of the Porsche 928, big front engine car, 8 cylinders, no radiator grill. So we know that you don't need big radiator grills on cars for a long time, but it's a symbol. And so that symbol now gets challenged even more so because you need different airflows and you need less cooling air up front where the combustion engine produces heat. You have different requirements. And I would argue no one has really yet completely exploited that to create a new aesthetic of the electric. There's some attempts. There are some brands that are better than others. But when you think about it, when you drive a car fast, a combustion engine car, you create a lot of heat the faster you go. engine works harder, logical. That's why you have this big opening, so lots of air comes through. When you drive an electric car, actually you create the most heat as you charge the car, especially as you charge it quickly when the car doesn't move. So you have completely different aerodynamic problems of getting hot air in and out of the car. I would love to work on the aerodynamics of the electric car from that point of view, to really tell the story of what happens to the heat and what happens to the air. So far, we're in an old paradigm. So that's why I think, I understand your feeling that there's something missing, something wrong.
When electric cars go for the fake grille, I don't miss something. It's more that I think there's something that shouldn't be there in the first place, and it adds something that contradicts the authenticity of the brands. When we think about the German premium brands who have performance always as a key pillar in their brand meaning, and we have mentioned this a couple of times in the previous episodes, that design basically embodies the meaning of the brand, and now it embodies something. What does it embody? It doesn't embody anything. It's just a fake plastic panel that hopes to shape brand recognition, and that's it. It's a styling element. And when this happens, the role of design changes. It shifts from being an integral functional part to being degraded to a styling part. And then all this happens, what you mentioned, everyone has an opinion on styling, but no one can have an opinion on function. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And this is where design takes the wrong turn, when it starts to accept becoming a styling feature again, just another feature and not a key functional part anymore. And this, in my opinion, downgrades the role of design.
It's an interesting conundrum. I would say on the one hand, I want to challenge you because I can think of so many examples of fake grills in the history of cars done for very silly branding exercises. Think of the original Mini that you could buy as a Wolseley that had a sort of a fake prestige grille on the front. It looked terrible in many ways, but it was exactly that, harking back to a time where cars had big bonnets, and the Mini, of course, didn't have a big bonnet and a tall grille. No, the Mini had a tiny, low grille because that's where the radiator was. And even the original Mini didn't even need a symmetrical grille because the radiator was in one corner rather than on either side. So the car is not an entirely technical and rational and form follows function thing. Even in design, form follows function is a bit of an overhyped myth. The relationship is a bit more complicated than that, I would say. In design, there are certain signifiers that have a strong meaning. Ideally, as a brand, you have more than one signifier. So you have, of course, your logo. That's a strong signifier. You have some character shapes that are strong signifiers. And some of them can be in unexpected places. Think of BMW's Hofmeister, Knick, or Kink. That is an unexpected signifier that wasn't particularly difficult to achieve, but it had a strong reason, and therefore it's there, and people recognize it. But also because BMW very stubbornly kept it and evolved it over time, while other companies experimented and changed and got bored of their own philosophy and moved on. The grille is a particular thing because we associate it with function, but the function has changed many times. If you want to think of this as a giver of identity, and you call it a poor shield, like a plastic lid, basically. Ironically, this is a very powerful metaphor because this is how, when you think of the origin of branding, certainly in the Western world, branding comes from heraldics, and you had the heraldics on your shields. This is how you styled yourself. Literally, the word styling has a relationship to this. And that's where you had your horses and your checkers and your gold and your azure and whatever it's called, because you wanted to be recognizable to a larger audience in a tournament, to your enemy, to signal. So the shield, actually, ironically, is one of the most powerful human devices to communicate visually. And the grille somehow has taken on the metaphor of the shield. So the radiator, for some reason, took on the function of the shield. When you think of it in terms of heraldics and warfare, there's essentially only two types of front-end designs. They're the ones that have the metaphor of the aeronautical hull. Think of the Jaguar E-Type, the Jaguar D-Type, of course, before it. anything that suggests a hole where something goes through a turbine or some sort of engine, or everything else is the shield. And most companies at some point choose whether they go into one or the other. Some try both, some successful, some not. So the shield is not a bad thing. You can do many things with a shield that doesn't have to have the aerodynamic function to work as an element where you give a strong character and brand recognition. So I don't find it offensive to have an area that is a brand zone that needs to be, first of all, aerodynamic enough that the air goes around the car, rather than something that needs to feed air to a radiator or not.
That's a very interesting point, to have a brand zone. My thinking about this is, what if we started today and the brands had no past? Would they start with a shield, with a brand zone that is a complete burden actually from the design, which is aerodynamically problematic? First principle thinking, why does it make sense? This is just an ornament. And from my perspective, it completely contradicts the meaning of these brands. And it's not a benefit. It doesn't make the car better. It's just for the sake of familiarity, for the sake of a familiarity of the past. If we want to attract new generations in 10, 20, 30 years, when the new customer have no previous relationship to a brand, and it doesn't mean anything to them, the neon or
the kidneys,
single frame grille, it doesn't mean anything to them. And they just have question marks in front of their face when they see it with a panel cupboard or a lid or whatever we call it. And this is just baggage of the past with new technology. It's just re-engineering the past from my perspective, and it weakens the brand, because when the design really takes on its most powerful role, that it is a tool to embody the meaning of a brand, then it has to embody the meaning of the brand. And this is not the meaning of the brand, to show a gigantic logo. And we see this now even with light signatures, so that we basically recreate the logos in the dark.
It smells a little bit of the idea of overcompensation. So because there's such a fear that you lose your brand identity, you place gigantic logos in size, but also gigantic numbers of logos everywhere. And I think Mercedes is more guilty than almost any other brand of over-branding everything. There's dozens of logos on the wheel. There's another one on the cap on the wheel. There's a logo now in the lamps, and there's many more logos in the grille, and many more logos on the special edition paint job on the bonnet. It's too much. And it shows that there's a problem with the brand itself, because no strong brand needs to overbrand. Certain brands were so convinced that it's not about the logo that they called that the dust sheet look. Like when you cover the model with a cloth or a dust sheet, you still have to recognize the brand. That's true strength. Very few brands actually achieve that. So plastering your car full of logos is, for me, an admission of a bigger problem.
Coke bottle design strength.
I mean, the design brief of the Coke bottle is fascinating, because the briefing was, of course, it has to feel good, but it has to be so recognizable that even if it's broken or thrown away, that you still recognize the brand. Good thinking there. Very early commercial design thinking there. But I think we made this very interesting digression. What happens when our why doesn't work anymore? So yes, it's too simple to hang on to old symbols when the underlying technology is fundamentally different. So you could say a brave brand would embrace the paradigm shift and go into new archetypes. I would argue that this is something that in the slightly more optimistic 80s we could see, or in the slightly more iconoclastic 70s we could even see, even though they were not particularly optimistic as times. But think of the Citroëns of the 1980s. Think of some of the cars that had logos not in the center but on the side, almost like a signature on a painting, rather than the central element that gives symmetry and symbolism. We've lived a shift away from design and innovation as symbols of progress to a very dominant branding story that became more important than the actual shapes of individual cars and models. And I think we're at the end of that, because we see that it's a little bit of a dead end for many brands because they became prisoners. Some companies basically design a big grille now and attach some sort of a car to it. And that looks very, very old already. Imagine how old that will look in a few years' time.
Yes, they are trying to do the Coke bottle brief. How can we recognize the shape of the brand immediately? And this is the key problem of this question. What if our why is no longer convincing anymore? Because the aesthetics part of design has reached an end. It's no longer a key differentiator, because today with AI, aesthetics have become a commodity. You can design anything with great aesthetics and copy this Coke bottle shape of any brand without any problems. And there are even no manufacturing constraints. All these constraints are gone. So we can have now any aesthetics, and aesthetics is no longer a mode for a brand that can keep off its competitors with its aesthetics. And now design has to go deeper. It has to start earlier in the process with a clear meaning. It has to start with the brand, not with aesthetics. This is my key point here. Today, the design still tries to hold on its design cues, its pure aesthetics of what they have, the kidneys, the Hofmeister kink, and then they try to make it electric. But these elements, they wouldn't be here in the first place if history had started with electric cars.
Interesting point.
So in this case, in the case of a BMW, the question would be, what is the brand about and how can we express this in an electric way? And then electric mobility becomes a tool. It becomes a powerful tool, and design its complementary tool to express the meaning of the brand. And then you have a strong, powerful and unique design that is really bulletproof in terms of any side opinions, because it's authentic, it's clear, it's true to itself. And I think this is something you mentioned before, the fake exhaust tips. What does this say about me when I drive a car with fake exhaust tips? How do I feel as a person when I buy something that is fake at first sight, when even the school children point their fingers at it and say, this is fake? And I remember when I was a kid, I always counted how many exhaust tips the cars have. Oh, this has 2 or 4 and they must be extra powerful. And you can't fool even children with a fake exhaust tip. So what does the buyer hope to, what kind of impression does he hope to make with a car with fake exhaust tips? I'm fake. What's his message?
Well, I think we need to invite a psychologist very soon to this podcast, because there are many questions about that. It is interesting, isn't it? Because there are certain codes that seem to signal power, potency, and it's a psychological signifier. And of course, what happens when everyone knows that it's fake? There's some very good science fiction novels that write about these societies where everyone knows that 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 the premises are wrong. So it's problematic. I agree with you. At the same time, real authenticity, pure, raw things are very niche. So of course, the purists will completely agree with our problem that we have with this. But many marketing people will tell you, yeah, but most people don't care. They just want this sort of thing, and that's what sells, and that's what we're going to do. Safety in the center, safety in the middle, safety in mediocrity. So these are the forces that are always at play. But I want to go back to this point where you said aesthetics have become interchangeable. AI has made everything pretty. It is quite an irony when you think about it. Never have there been so many possibilities in terms of feasibility, in terms of materials, in terms of illumination, in terms of shapes and complexity. And at the same time, we feel like we're, aesthetically speaking, whether it's in cars or in other industries as well, we seem to really have gone into this very mediocre, very eclectic, anything goes, but nothing is really done out of conviction at the moment. So it's extremely difficult to even say what is the trend today, because you could find 2 completely contradicting trends that are growing and will be gone tomorrow. So it's a very strange moment where maybe because everything is possible, nothing strong gets the traction of becoming a leading motive for aesthetics.
Let's move on to the consequences. And I think your last answer already is a part of the consequence. This too many options paradox. When everything is possible, you hold on to what is safe. Maybe in the past, pushing forward felt safer because it was so hard to improve and there was only one direction, as we already mentioned. So, of course, the next generation had to be faster, it had to be safer, it had to improve engine-wise and the like. It was so clear, the direction, and this also meant that the many involved departments, they could work independently and they had their own way and they were still aligned because the direction was the same for everyone. And now the electric version of the car or the new model suddenly has a completely different character than the previous combustion version of the car. And you change the brand. So the key challenge of design today is that design is a brand shaper. If it takes on the challenge or it refuses to take on the challenge, it shapes the brand. It expresses how a brand is perceived. And when the brand is not clear, when the meaning of the brand is not crystal clear, design is left to its aesthetics. Whatever it has up in its pockets, it has to bring it to life. Design has the challenge to make it real, to make it happen. To me, the whole problem is not a design problem. It's a brand problem, a key problem of the whole season with our 5 episodes here, where we really try to emphasize that today it's no longer about aesthetics, but about the meaning of the brand that can be expressed in design. And when the meaning is clear, and we've had these examples with Tesla, when there is a clear meaning of the brand, then design becomes coherent. It has a clear mission again, a clear target again. And then the puzzle pieces fall into place and they work together and they create one common, coherent picture, and people know what you want to express and it makes sense. The whole thing is very strong. The brand is strong. That's why the product is strong and its communication is strong.
These conversations don't end here. Where is strategy and design breaking down for you right now? What's slowing down your team or creating friction? Chances are it's at the intersection of strategy and design. We're here to help, analytically and confidentially. Contact us at makeitprettyplease.com. That's make-it-pretty-please.com.
Without strategy, design is limited in its impact. I agree with you on this. I think the magic about design is that it is a very complicated word when you think about it, because what you're describing now when you said design, you basically use design as in design the verb, the activity of doing something. You used it in design as an object, the design of the car. The design department is also a thing, like the function of design. And of course, the larger idea of design as an activity and as a discipline. And they're not always the same because there's different dynamics in this as well. The stronger your intention is clear, I'm talking about the company, the brand, the entrepreneur, the easier it is for design to play to its strength, to have the visually impactful, the customer experience, to bring the materials together and create strong experiences. That's what design is all about. The consequence of this confusion is basically saying anyone can go anywhere, and if no one knows where to go, everyone is lost. That's the sort of picture that you're painting. And you could argue, yes, that's where a lot of the mass manufacturers risk going, some more, some less. Ultimately, it is a decision. You need to take a decision within the company, together with the design department, ideally. Best if you have everyone on board. Communications, design, engineering, marketing, and so on. I see it almost as two polar opposites that are possible. One is to say we really embrace the new, we embrace the future, and we boldly go where the new takes us. And then you only need to define what is new for us. Is new doing something different every time? You could say that certain Ferraris very bravely have explored new things every time. You could certainly say that many Hyundais have always done different things from one model to another, from one strategy, from one generation to another. The new can then be defined. Maybe it's just the latest trend. Once again, Hyundai is one of the first ones that really bring 80s nostalgic digital trends into production cars. And it works, and it looks fresh and cool and hip. The strategy in this case is let's embrace the new. Let's not worry about the past. Let's do what is cool and resonates with people. It doesn't need to be coherent. It doesn't need to be coherent in a region. It doesn't have to be coherent at the dealership. It doesn't have to be coherent to what we've done yesterday. But that's a very strong strategy. The other one is what I call the new radical, what a lot of the heritage brands are doing. They're saying, like, everything is changing so quickly around us. We take a radical decision. We don't change anything. We just do what we've always done. And when everyone else changes and you stand still, that's a radical act today. And I think every brand has to make this path to get to this conscious decision. Do we keep certain things sacred? And what are they? And what are the things that we need to, of course, adapt to because things change, regulations change, demographics change? Or do we really say, like, well, all we care about is our relevance in the marketplace. We'll do whatever is the cool, fresh, young, new, different thing.
For me, this is exactly when you're stuck in aesthetics. Both routes are based on aesthetics. They have nothing to do with the brand because it's not about the brand in the first place. So they just have the aesthetics of a given objects, and then we try to either jump on any random trend that's coming, whatever that is, be it retro trends or some lightning signature trends we've seen in the past, and then everybody starts doing the split headlights. But this is not brand-based. This is just aesthetically driven brand differentiation that starts again with matching, in my opinion, the wrong path. Because we are in an era where we have so many brands. If there was only one brand on this planet, yes, then it would be a viable strategy to say we can do any car. It doesn't have to relate to the previous one and to the next one. What kind of strategy is it to be kind of random and have no recognition at all? You start with a weaker brand position than you have to. And the other option to stay in the same place, redesigning the past. The problem here is what we've discussed previously with the authenticity. It wouldn't be a problem if the grille would have any function. And you're right, there were cars also in the combustion era that had semi-fake grills, but the grill still was a grill. It had air flowing through it. From my perspective, it just degrades design to styling. And then design is just a feature, and features can no longer differentiate brands. As a design leader, what do you need to create a new model with a new technology, the follow-up model with electric technology? What would your ideal starting position look like?
It's hard to generalize because it depends very much on the brand, on the concrete situation. I would build a logic that leads to a strong decision-making point. I would work in scenarios, in other words. I would say, well, if we're here now and we change powertrains, we can do it in 3 different ways. We can do it in the continuity way where we say, well, it's just different engine, but why do you care? No one cares about engines anyway. That's one logic. The other one is to say, like, well, let's celebrate the opportunities that we get from a different powertrain, because maybe the interior will look very different. Maybe there's no tunnel. Maybe there's a different proportion on the exterior. Maybe there's a different section in the rocker panel. Maybe there's an advantage getting in and out of the car. I don't know. But you can then say, like, well, let's celebrate each and every one of the changes and contrast that with the continuity approach and say, like, well, what if we forgot about that side and we just focus on doing something that is an attractive product for real people to use? And then when that becomes clearer, what are the differences? then you can make that decision. Okay, it's probably more on this side than on that side. Then you can build consensus and then you can make a strong decision. So my understanding as design leadership in an automotive context is to really bring strong alternatives to the table where whatever you decide is a good decision.
From my perspective, our false belief is that the next model, the electric model, has to go exactly the same direction as the previous model. So it has to be better than the previous model in its given key features. But the rules have changed. So there is no more powerful, faster, and the like anymore. The KPIs of the model are completely different. And when we're stuck in this rut of thinking in continuity, we end up where we are now with cars that are just too heavy, too big, and they try to compensate for the range with these enormous expensive batteries and are no longer suitable for their use case. This is a key problem with electric mobility, that the thinking starts with the previous model and it doesn't start with the brand, because the previous model, it had a clear use case. And it might be that this use case has been forgotten also decades ago, and that we were stuck in this continuous optimization, this bigger, better, faster from model to model. But it had a strong use case in the beginning, a strong why. And this was the why of the model. And this was why it became successful in the first place. And now we don't re-engineer the why, we re-engineer an outcome, this answer to a forgotten question, basically, and hope that it still works. And it doesn't, because these cars, they are no longer the sweet spot of mobility. They're 2 tons, 2 meters wide. They don't even fit in the garages of the people's houses. You cannot even drive them easily in the cities because they're just too wide. And my epiphany was when I was riding motorcycle in the mountains, and there are always these traffic lights in front of construction areas. And then I overtook about 10 Ferraris, and I thought, this is the wrong decision because they're going to hunt me down. But they were so slow, I couldn't see them because they were just too wide for the road. They couldn't drive faster than 50 kilometers per hour because every cyclist on the road is in danger of them because there is no space for them. This is where we reach the end of optimization, where 800 horsepower, whatever, 1,000 horsepower are no longer strength. If you have a Lotus Elise, that's a weapon in this area.
I think this is a very good example of the end of a line. Like you add and add and add and add. And most designers would be unhappy if we said more is more. So it's gotten too much. Quite simply, too much weight, too much height, too much mass, too much of the same. And it is a problem. When you describe these moments before, design losing its meaning and so on, and then you describe these cars, I was almost feeling sorry for the designers in my mind, because that is not usually something you can control as an automotive designer in a company. You have very little control over the actual width, the weight, and some of the package constraints. You can influence them a little bit, and 95% of your energy goes into making that 5% change that creates character. But it's a general problem. And I think the only time you can do this is when you have radical projects, either radical projects that are intended to go into production, or radical projects when you are allowed to think freely with a few partners in crime in an advanced design project, or in what used to be the adventurous concept car here and there. And that's when you can challenge and ask the big why question. Because when we said initially, what if our why doesn't work anymore? I think there are 2 whys, if we're honest with ourselves. One is the big why, the brand why. And that is its own discussion. What if our brand why becomes obsolete? What if, let's say, my brand promise is all about sports and driving and the engine sound and so on, and all of a sudden the future is clearly electric and autonomous drive? Then I really lose my brand meaning because of that main paradigm shift. And there's also the shift when you say, like, well, my brand meaning is very strong, But my small why do I build this specific model, can get confused. And even some very strong brands suffer from that sometimes because the product definition isn't good enough or too much of the same, or it tries to benchmark too many things. So we talked about this also. But how do we get out of this dilemma? It is, unfortunately, something that happens very rarely. And some companies do that very consciously. But you need illuminated company leadership that says, what if we did things differently? What if we asked the big why question? What do our customers really need? What is a real mobility need? And what is the role of these devices that solve these mobility needs? So I would say we're at the end of the long mid-20th century, because most of the paradigms that we have in the car world are mid-20th century paradigms. I have my sports car because I have the flexibility and not so much responsibility, so I can have a sports car, or it's my second car. If you need a big car, well, get a big station wagon, get a big van. All of that was done in the 50s and 60s. All the essential icons, maybe with the exception of the SUV, there were only precursors at that time. So we've really seen 70 years of not challenging our main assumptions. House parked in the street, petrol station around the corner, all of these things were taken for granted. These things are changing now, and not necessarily just because of the most recent military conflicts that I also talk about as very often about energy, but because society has changed, your logic has changed. So in a world where going on vacation doesn't mean going on vacation with your car, in a world where going shopping doesn't mean going shopping with your car, all of a sudden the car itself hasn't been questioned deeply enough for a critical amount of time.
I think one mega trend is this urbanization, and urbanization didn't render the car useless. It just opened up new use cases that haven't been tapped yet. So we have this universal tool, which is the SUV today, and we try to solve every problem with the SUV. And it's only this one tool. We have this hammer and we see everywhere a nail. This is where the car loses its relevance. And to me, the car is still the most potent device of mobility. It's the ultimate mobility device if it delivers on its promise. And this is that it has weatherproof mobility, that it is effortless, that it is approachable, that it is in reach for the average consumer. And we fall out of this promise slowly if we keep designing SUVs with fake grills on it and hope for them to be the answer of the future. Then the car will become less relevant. Then we open up the big questions. Why do we need cars at all? And I would say the moment bicycles start to try to become more relevant, they always try to add a roof or something like that. And then they look ugly and nobody wants them and they fail. But in the end, they always try to imitate the car. Why doesn't the car try to start thinking about new use cases and in ways that work for the brand, that start with the brand, that express the meaning of the brand, that don't look like some compromised versions of the real thing, but something real, something authentic, something true to the brand people like. And since the product embodies the brand, these products can also embody their brand. And you just need to know, that's easier said than done, by the way, what the brand is about. And if you know what the brand is about, you can tap into these new use cases and make the car super relevant, even in the urban sphere, and create something that works and is not compromised by space or by other constraints we face today.
This reminds me of an exercise that you do in many design schools when you start off, because especially in car design, you can't design without the brand in mind. It's almost impossible to design a car without thinking of the brand. It seems paradoxical to have every freedom in the world, but that's actually very hard to do a car. So what is done to actually make that a bit more obvious to design students is to ask them to design a car for a brand that is not a car brand. the task is like, what if you design the car for IKEA? What if you design the car for an Italian pasta brand? It can be anything really, because then you really need to work on this because you have no precedent. There's no one, you can't look up, oh, what does the previous IKEA car look like? There is no IKEA car, of course. So you're forced to work on brand values, and then you can take the functional route. Then you can take an aesthetic route. Then you can take a color route. Then you can take a conceptual route, whatever it is. And I think that is a great starting point to pretend that the brand is what it is. And it's not an aesthetic expression yet. It is really a brand promise. And from that, you build product answers that are maybe cars, but not necessarily cars as we know them. And that would be a very healthy exercise to do more often. But that's the big exception because, as we said, very often you're stuck in a process where you've invested already millions and millions of people's salaries and time and tools and prototypes, and no one dares to ask the big why questions because you're kind of stuck into the logic of the known. While the real future is probably in the unknown, and that's a lot harder to deal with.
Yeah, I think we are in such unprecedented times that continuing the way we did things is no longer working. And if I was a designer, I wouldn't wait for an opportunity or hope for the perfect brief to come along because it never will. I would just start thinking by myself freely what I do in design. And as a leader, I would dedicate the Fridays off for free thinking. Just keep in mind, today we are creating the heritage of the future. And right now, I don't see anything that is heritage-able, if this is a word. And this heritage the brands live off today, it's priceless. Without the heritage, the brands had no justification to be in this marketplace at all. They wouldn't even have the aesthetics to hold on to. In this kind of time, it will not last that long because there are so many brands competing for a given market. And this is like the same as it was 100 years ago. There were also so many brands and only very few survived. They had some coherent answer to a problem, or they had a clear meaning. That's why they survived. And you cannot remember the many, many other brands that didn't. Now we start from scratch again. We start with a new technology, with a new era, and it's game on. So we need these breakthroughs we've touched on in previous episodes. I would say one day off for clear thinking and for experiments. And I think it's a flaw for companies of this size to only take safe bets or seemingly safe bets and then hope that they will play out in 10 or 20 years. They might play out for the next 3 years, and now people are happy that they recognize their Mercedes again because it has the grille. But a different generation, 15 years from now, they don't care about LED lit grille that is not working.
That might look like a very old-fashioned thing in a few years, the LED grills of many brands. I agree with you. I think I like the idea of Fridays for Future for mobility, because sometimes it is because you're stuck in a paradigm and we're so obsessed with this very strange idea of efficiency at the moment, where you think just because you can do more in a certain amount of time, it's automatically better. There's nothing automatically better about doing more of the same thing. You're just generating more, but it's not necessarily better quality. So I do like the idea, even the concrete idea of saying, like, wouldn't it be better for a company if we invested a fixed amount of time really thinking about the future, no matter what industry you're in? The other thing that you mentioned is the SUV, which is kind of the Swiss Army knife of the car industry now. And I hate Swiss Army knives. I think it's one of the most stupid objects that we have in our society because it promises everything and it keeps nothing. It's a terrible screwdriver. It's a horrible bottle opener. It's a pretty limited sort of tool for most other things. But it's so nice and shiny and nicely branded. And have you ever used any of these things? Seriously? Like, usually you use it when every other option fails, and then you usually hurt yourself doing one or two things. It's a disaster, but it is a very clever metaphor. I think that you're onto something by calling the SUVs a Swiss Army knife, because they're just different sizes of Swiss Army knives. And ironically, the bigger the Swiss Army knife gets with like 27 layers, the more absurd they become. The best Swiss Army knife is the one that has one blade. That's the one that you can use because you fold one knife in, and that is a functional benefit. But by adding 4 knives, 7 opportunities to do this and that, it's obsolete. It's useless. And I think it's that sort of extra weight that most SUVs, especially the big SUVs, carry with them, because you mentally prepare yourself. And maybe the Americans are the most guilty of that at the moment, this sort of prepper mindset. You prepare yourself for very pessimistic scenarios, and you don't dare leave your house unless you feel completely prepared for Armageddon, basically. And that's the problem that I see, really zooming out, that we face in many societies today, this sort of very defensive, very pessimistic general outlook onto the world. And the SUV, in many ways, is a symbol of that. It's the Swiss Army knife of mobility at the moment.
You can either see it from the pessimistic perspective or the optimistic, to say, I want to have a car that can potentially do anything, and I'm ready to go embark the big adventure anytime, anywhere. But I mean, the SUV is a synonym for wishes you hope that don't come true, because you can hold on to them, but actually you are afraid of them becoming true, because then you would have to face them and the consequences of that. But to come back to what if our why is not convincing anymore, I think the use case of the car is as relevant as ever. We've just lost our way of first principle thinking, what Elon Musk is saying, that you think, what are we really trying to accomplish with it, and not just start by improving something that's already there. When we go back to asking this question, then we can come up with completely different answer, and no one will come up with a Swiss Army knife when a screwdriver is needed.
Now, looking back over these thoughts, what are the most important insights? What key points can we take away from today's encounter?
It is super important to ask the big whys. I think that's a key leadership function, as we said before. But it is also important that multiple layers in an organization are allowed to ask the big why question permanently. I think it's also clear that, yes, we live in a very paradoxical world, unprecedented possibilities on the tech side, unprecedented possibilities in terms of shape, in terms of design tools, but unfortunately also a very strong convergence to mainstream safety, perceived practicality solutions that ultimately don't make your life much better in reality. So that's kind of like a slightly pessimistic world at the moment that I see. But there's a spark of hope in there because we can achieve so much. Imagine what Henry Ford would have done with today's technology. Or imagine what an Enzo Ferrari would have done with all the stuff that we have. Imagine what Jules Verne would have written about if he had known of what we're capable of now. So I'm optimistic in a sense. It's just that I feel that we're a little bit trapped in the past at the moment. And we struggle, whether it's designers or strategy people or entrepreneurs, we struggle to free ourselves from the shackles of today, which is defined by the shackles of yesterday.
I like the idea to think about what Enzo Ferrari would have done with today's technology. And I'm sure he wouldn't wait for someone to come up to him and say, I allow you to think freely, and what would you do with this technology? And what I've learned from this episode is that we live in unprecedented times, that the upside potential today is so high that it's almost criminal to sit and wait for someone to come up and hand you the perfect brief, because this person will never come. So it's up to everyone themselves to start thinking freely. And this is basically what we mean whereby if our why is no longer relevant anymore, to think freely and create something with the tools at hand, which are amazing today, and create solutions and bring them up to a stage where decision makers can see the potential of it, the breakthrough potential of this. And then we are there, what we've mentioned so many times now in these episodes, that it feels right. You see something and it feels right. And the designer has all the tools at hand to do this, to create something, to visualize something a decision maker can see feels right. And of course, you need the strategy. Of course, strategy is an accelerator to do this. But even if I was just by myself a designer, I would start sketching and thinking about what the brand is about and really challenging myself to come up with better solutions. And if I had to do it in the evening hours, I would do it, because this is the chance is now, and we will probably never get this again to this point where it's so free. This is like the golden era of design, where design really can shape brands. And you have the chance today to create the design cues of the electric era for your brand. You have to do it. You have to come up with it by yourself. There is no brief, because the decision makers, they are not designers. They can't give you the cues of the future. So you have to come up with them.
Yes, the designers can do a lot of this. And it's interesting that designers have also unprecedented tools at their disposition. The average student that comes out of a design school today can use ChatGPT or any other AI sort of coding software, prompting software. You need to draw. You need to be able to model. You can sketch in 3D. You can make brand movies. You can do so many things that were absolutely unthinkable to a design student graduating before the turn of the century. Unthinkable. So it is absolutely true. What I wish, and I'm very proud of what the young designers can do nowadays, I wish that this was true for everybody. I wish that was true for the marketeers. I wish that that was true also for hardware engineers. Maybe I've not had the chance to meet that sort of creativity coming out of the engineering departments. There are, of course, very creative engineering departments. They tend to be more on the software side nowadays than on the hardware side. But wouldn't it be amazing if that sort of technology would inspire the engineers as much as it inspires the designers? Because then you could really go into this creative dance between the classic designers, the ones that talk about shape and forms, bring it together with the engineers, bring it together with the people who know about materials, bring it together with experts in ergonomics and psychology. That's how real things happen. A designer by himself basically becomes an artist. As interesting as that might be, but that's not how big impact is created. It's always that strong friction and inspirational dance that happens when everyone wants to push forward.
Yes, that's a very important point. And if the Fridays for Future becomes a reality, I would do this with interdisciplinary teams, that you have a designer and someone from a technology department and also someone from marketing to work on the future of the brand or the next product, and combine forces and start thinking and experimenting. And then you have decision makers who can think in bigger pictures and see the potential or not. There is no continuity from bigger, better, faster anymore. We have to think outside the boxes, and this is the chance we face right now from my perspective. And the brand is this handrail we have to hold on to, and not the design cues of the past.
There's this expression that I like to use every once in a while. It's trust the process. Once you've done it a few times, the process is a magical thing, because you have your first ideas, you have your first exchanges, you mature it, you maybe throw it away 5 more times. But the process is something very useful. And what tools you use, whether it's AI or a piece of paper, it doesn't really matter, because it's the process that counts. And it's the process where people ask questions, ask the why questions, find solutions, ask the what if questions. And at the end of this process, something new comes up. So to attempt to kind of answer this question, what if our why doesn't work anymore? I think what I take away from this conversation is really the importance when you realize that there's potentially an issue with your why. Yes, you most likely have an issue with the why, but that's the first step. You need to admit as an organization, as a company, yes, there is something that we can't quite define yet, but we have a problem here. We follow certain things without asking why we're really doing it. And then trust the process. You go into it, you analyze certain things, you ask the what ifs and the whys. There's a famous Toyota Way Kaizen sort of process. If you ask why 5 times in a row, why do we have this problem? Because it's the machine that broke down. And why is the machine broken down? Because someone forgot to order this. Why did someone forget this? Because the person didn't know. So usually with 5 whys, you get to a lot of big root causes for things. So that's a very simple example. But my takeaway is asking the question and admitting that there is something to change is really the most important decision you can make.
Thank you, Felix. I think there were many insights we touched on, and nice talking to you.
Good fun, Wolfgang, as always.
That's it for today's episode. If you like what you heard, hey, spread the word and share it with others. You can find us on LinkedIn, on your favorite podcast channels, or on makeitprettyplease.com. That's make-it-pretty-please.com. Until next time.